Welcome to the death of democracy. This is The World According to Jen and Carolyn. Well, it looks like we're actually recording this time. That's exciting. We had a little bit of a false start, but we're ready to party. We're ready to party like it's Vladimir Putin's
like
Russia.
2016.
Yeah, like it's 2016 or, like 1950, because that seems to be the direction that we're heading in. So everybody, this is our first episode after Trump has been again elected president. I'd like to say I don't know what's wrong with half the country, but I do. I think it ultimately boils down to racism and sexism. Mm-hmm. When the Taliban is congratulating us on electing the man and not the woman,
you might have a problem.
Yeah, our fans aren't the ones we want, guys. So, we're in the shit right now, and this will break it down. So here's what I wrote when I started writing this episode. All right, y'all, we're writing this episode on the eve of the most important election of our lives. By the time this episode drops, we'll either have a fascist authoritarian president or our first female president who represents hope, acceptance, and equity. I'm going to cry reading this.
Yeah.
Either way, Jen and Carolyn think this topic is extremely relevant, and it's important to understand how a candidate like Donald Trump not only slithered his way into the White House, but also, in spite of nearly toppling democracy, came close to winning for a second time. Okay. Here's what
we really thought. We really were optimistic.
We were. And I think at the end of the day, my concern was, which is concern I expressed when she became the Democratic nominee, was that this country is far too racist and far too sexist. I think a black man, okay, it's still a man, but you got a woman. Oof, that's a bridge too far for a lot of Americans, unfortunately. So here's what I ended up writing to create this intro. Well, here we are finishing this episode up the night after the election, and boy, have things changed. Yeah. In spite of his comments about shooting both Liz Cheney and the press, in spite of his unhinged word salad rants that make George W. look like a goddamn poet laureate, in spite of his recent comments about how he should have never left the White House, this fucking felon trash who can't even legally do business in New York and can't vote in most states is our president yet again. So Carolyn and I today are going to break down a document called the Authoritarian Playbook, as well as some other contributing documents that talk about how democracies essentially descend into dictatorships or to an authoritarian regime. So
a lot of information out there.
Yeah. I already asked you where you kind of told us there's a lot of information because people have been writing about this since his first term.
Yeah.
And numerous people have come out and have violated, laws and codes of ethics, like you said, in regard to mental health professionals who aren't legally allowed to diagnose someone they're not working with. Yep. They all came together and said, fuck that. Yeah. This man is a danger to our country, to the world.
What I found in doing a lot of the research for this episode was that, things in 2023 were saying this could happen, but America wouldn't let that happen.
Yeah.
It was really disheartening reading that, to your point. And perhaps this is our privilege showing that I think I'm humbled by how truly bad things have become.
Yeah. No, we are.
I don't think I really have my finger on that pulse.
We're also in San Francisco. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, but it's even that. I mean, look, and you could say that in California, but look how blue California was. How red California was.
My neighborhood, in spite of being comprised primarily of Chinese and Latino immigrants, was one of the biggest pockets of Trump voters in San Francisco, in addition to the rich.
So I think that's the shock I've been feeling.
Yeah.
How have I been feeling? I've been a little bit silent. I think my nervous system reacts by shutting down.
Yeah.
When I'm in grief and fear, which I really am.
Yeah.
My immediate thought was, for those of you who don't know, I'm a licensed I don't know what I am. What the fuck
Nobody
am
knows
I?
what they are anymore.
I'm a marriage and family therapist. And the first thing I thought about was some of my clients who are being already directly impacted by this.
Yeah.
And I can feel my body trying to heal itself and process this very multidimensional layer of grief. And I've sobbed. You and I have sobbed. You've sobbed. We both held back those tears several times this week in various moments. And some have been directly related to this election, but I've reflected on some of, I've kind of lost my shit twice at my job.
Yeah.
And it occurred specifically when I've reflected back, it was times when I wasn't being listened to by others because I disagreed with something they were doing or opinion, something I thought was being dismissed.
Yeah.
That's when it really came out.
Yeah.
And I also will name that as a, I said, as a therapist, my capacity to hold my feelings and then host space for others. Mental health professionals, and I think anyone in public service, even anyone who's interacting with people, it's going to get pushed to its limits. And I'm feeling that almost like preemptively, because it's such a collective experience. I'll also say my practice grew, which normally I'd be really happy about, by 5 returning clients because of how this has affected them.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's a coincidence.
No, it's not.
I'm also fascinated with observing how differently people are reacting and responding to this in their friendships and their families on social media and in the workplace. And it feels so polarizing.
Yeah.
And I don't think this is maybe the first time I've ever felt really afraid.
Yes.
And and I can't even say it's going to directly impact me too immediately.
Yeah. And I think that's why, I made a TikTok. I've made several TikToks this week.
You're on fire. Your TikToks rule.
You can see how angry I am. Whereas Carolyn's, I think
ready yet.
Instinct is to go inside. Mine is to project rage.
Do people want to see me crying?
I don't know. I think
don't know either.
It feels normalizing, right? I think being vulnerable takes it. It's hard to be vulnerable, but I think I like seeing people be vulnerable, especially since a lot of us are feeling similarly. But I'll say this before we jump into the topic. We're not mad because their candidate won. We're mad because their candidate is a racist lunatic. Yep. Like, it's like my crazy Uncle Andy, who was this fucking virulent racist, has been elected president.
Yeah.
Like, it's literally that.
Yeah.
Like a man who
twice.
Yeah. Man who praises Adolf Hitler and has been heard by very credible people who used to work with and for him, saying, we've heard this man praise Hitler. This is fucking scary, dude. We fought a war against fascism in World War II, and now we literally have a Nazi as a president.
Yeah, America can't break up with this really bad boyfriend.
No, we're in an abusive relationship, and we're all fucked.
Yes.
None of us are going to be protected, even unless you're a very rich white man. I think they'll be insulated, but everybody else is fucked. Yep. So thank you. You all sold us out. So let's talk about this this document that I talked about, the Authoritarian Playbook. The full title of this report is written by an organization called Protect Democracy. The writers are Jennifer Dresden, Aaron Baird, and Ben Ratterstorff. And the full title is The Authoritarian Playbook, How Reporters Can Contextualize and Cover Authoritarian Threats as Distinct from Politics as Usual. So just last week, as I said, Trump said he wouldn't mind if a shooter shot their way through the press. He's made numerous disparaging comments about the press and even vowed that if reelected, which obviously he has been, he would go after reporters and news outlets that were mean to him, because that's the kind of narcissistic child this motherfucker is. As you and I know, a free press is one of the cornerstones of our democracy. It's one of the guardrails of our democracy, enshrined in the First Amendment. To threaten the press is akin to threatening democracy itself. And this is why we thought it was crucial to use this document first and foremost to frame our discussion today. And there's a lot of good information in this report that goes beyond the press. And we're going to largely omit, at least for now, the specific instructions and suggestions that are made for the press here. But we have the whole document linked in our show notes, so you can go ahead and check it out. So this report begins by discussing how over the last 30 years, threats to democracy evolved slowly, gradually eroding democratic systems. So we're not seeing coups anymore like we saw in Latin America with the help of the CIA, which I studied extensively when I was in college. So democracies more often now die gradually. as the institutional, legal, and political constraints on authoritarian leaders are slowly chipped away one by one. So by using what's called salami tactics, don't get hungry, Carolyn.
Yum.
I'm starving.
I love salami.
So do I, but not like this. Salami tactics are defined as slicing away at democracy a sliver at a time. Modern authoritarians still cement themselves in power, but they do so incrementally and gradually. So apparently a lot of Americans are feeling like our democracy is in peril. So there were a couple of polls taken, immediately preceding the election. And from those polls, 64% of Americans agree that democracy is in crisis and at risk of failing. Only 7% of young Americans view the United States as a healthy democracy. And the vast majority of Americans, 81%, say that in general, the news media is critical or very important, critical 42%, or very important 39% to democracy. And according to these leading scholars of democracy, the ones that wrote this paper, that is, aspiring modern authoritarians tend to employ the same 7 basic tactics in the pursuit of power. I talked about these in a TikTok, and all of these are going to sound familiar to you if you've been paying attention to Trump. So the first is scapegoating vulnerable communities. Right? The second is corrupting elections. Tick. Yeah. Stoking violence. Yep. No shit. Politicizing independent institutions, spreading disinformation, aggrandizing executive power, and quashing dissent. So I think we can all agree that Trump is engaged in all of these behaviors. But let's talk about number 1 and Trump's behavior. So, all democracies have certain functions that operate with some independence from partisan political actors. We've got, central banking, law enforcement, courts, official statistics, financial accounting, regulation, election administration. Right. This is what the framers intended. Yeah. Intelligence, national security. They all only work properly when appropriately protected from politics. So we've seen Trump attack the Justice Department and attempt to politicize election oversight measures. So that's number 1. Okay. Number 2 is disinformation. So the big lie, this coordinated disinformation campaign falsely claiming that the 2020 election was stolen. And God, obviously so much more. They're eating the cats, they're eating the dogs. What does he not lie about? And again, lying is different from disinformation. Yeah. Because the disinformation is people feeding into it and believing it and him putting it out there as fact for a particular purpose. In this case, to get people to vote for him and, just stoke racists. So 3, aggrandizing executive power and weakening checks and balances, as Carolyn said. Trump especially embraced emergency powers, pardons, and acting appointments while ignoring congressional subpoenas and spending appropriations, rejecting legislative oversight and claiming immunity from judicial accountability. And thanks to the Supreme Court, there's not a lot of accountability. That has yet to be tested. Yep. What did you mean, y'all, when you said that he was essentially immune when acting as president? I think we're about to find out. And I think it's a really scary. The prospects are scary, you guys. Yeah. 4, quashing criticism or dissent. Like we said, he used or threatened to use the regulatory and enforcement powers of the state to punish the speech of journalists in at least 4 ways. 1, initiating a government review to raise postal rates to punish the owner of the Washington Post, who's now Tommy, right? Is it the Washington Post? I think so. Directing DOJ enforcement actions against media companies, including CNN's parent company, interfering with White House press access, and threatening to revoke broadcast licenses. And now,
does this mean there won't be a White House press? Though it's the press thing where it's like a comedy thing.
Who knows? The dinner that they have, it's the press corps dinner, and it's supposed to be funny. Just like the one that they did with the priests, the Catholic one, it was supposed to be funny and good natured, and he made it really dark. That might be the one where he called Kamala a bitch or something. I don't know. It was really unhinged.
Keep track of all the racist shit that comes out of his mouth. I think that's why I'm
struggling, because these things have happened so many times. The craziest shit has come out and will continue to come out of this man's mouth. I can't keep track of the lies, the misinformation, the crazy comments. Yeah. It's nuts. Okay, 5. Scapegoating vulnerable communities.
This really pisses me off, though.
Yeah. Who hasn't he gone after? A favorite punching bag of him and his followers is trans folks. He's called Mexicans rapists and murderers. He's the racist. he's the murderer or the rapist, not the murderer. I'm sorry. He's the rapist. So, he calls people like Elizabeth Warren Pocahontas. He calls countries populated by black and brown folks shithole countries. He is a virulent fucking racist. 6, corrupting elections. We now know an effort to block the certification of the 2020 election results involved coordination among state and local officials and former President Trump and his advisors. Since 2020, at least 19 states have passed election law changes that both reduce ballot access and provide more opportunities for partisan interference in the vote counting and certification. You know whose access to ballots has been primarily restricted in this population?
Oh, do tell.
This population always gets screwed. Prisoners? Black folks.
Black
prisoners
folks. Can't vote. Never mind.
Yeah. Black folks.
Yeah.
Trying to dismantle the Voting Rights Act, which disproportionately impacts black voters. They're always trying to do this shit because black folks vote Democrat, typically.
Hail to the black women.
Yeah.
Who fucking should put their money where their mouth is.
Yeah. And I'm here for your rage, y'all. And we're with you and we're here to be your allies. And
yeah,
I'm so sorry that this country has yet again, I'm so upset, has yet again just like shit on people of color and shit on queer people and shit on the most vulnerable populations. Not all of us, of course, but 50% of us have.
Well, and the hypocrisy of doing that in the name of God.
Oh, that's
in the name of values and in the name of as it is entirely because the Civil War was lost.
Yeah. Yeah,
no one's gotten over it yet.
Yeah, that's a huge part of it. Also, we have this incredibly intricate system of systemic racism that keeps this stuff going. Oh, we can't be overt racist anymore. Well, we're going to find
you can now.
Well, you can now everything
it's fine.
Yeah.
Apparently,
we're going to have white boys marching in the street with tiki torches very soon again.
I wouldn't be surprised.
Yeah, but racism is incredibly smart. It was devised deliberately to keep people, particularly low-income people, from fomenting a revolution against the folks with money and the people in power. And it's worked incredibly well. And that division is still happening amongst groups of white folks and people of color where there should be a coordinated effort to say, fuck this shit, fuck this system, because it's not working for any of us.
No.
It's really not. The smartest thing that the white folks in charge did was to say to white indentured servants and white low-income folks, hey, you're better. You're better than these black folks that you're trying to have a revolution with over here. Let me give you some property and white privilege.
Yep.
And this notion of white superiority. It's the smartest fucking thing they could have done. And it's still to this day working. So number 7, stoking violence. Between 2020 and 2021, there were over 1,200 events categorized as political violence in the United States, resulting in more than 150 deaths. The number of hate crimes reported to the FBI rose 41% between 2015 and 2020. Then we have January 6th. Guys, this was written, I think, in 2022. I can't quantify how many more things, if anything happened, I don't know. It's crazy. Like,
it is crazy.
So, Carolyn, I feel like we are living in a dystopian Orwell novel. And according to a Rand report, and they're not the most progressive folks, Putin's fire. But this was relevant. We're going to talk about Putin here because we all know how Trump feels about Putin. Putin's firehood of falsehood model, which emphasizes fire hose.
It's more phallic.
Yeah, fire hose. What did I say?
I just picture like men with their dicks pissing racism everywhere.
Totally. I mean, it's
fire hose of falsehood.
Firehood of falsehood model, which emphasizes loud, multi-channel, inconsistent, and at times surreal disinformation. Yeah. Surprisingly well-rooted in experimental psychology. So this helps to explain how Russian leaders are able to act with impunity, both at home and abroad. And we all know how much Trump idolizes his buddy Putin and emulates this model, the strongman model. Can you talk about the psychology that's referenced here?
I sure can. So we linked it in the show notes. It's a pretty long article. I gleaned some of it. Mm-hmm. First of all, thank you for sharing all that.
Yeah.
Take a breath, my love.
I'll breathe. Breathing's for suckers. No, I'm kidding. I do need to take a breath.
Rand article you refer to gives us basically a lit review on the influence and persuasion, as well as what's called experimental research in the field of psychology.
Okay.
And many of the features you described above, for you and I, run actually really counter to conventional wisdom on how to effectively influence communication from your government or defense resources. But, again, traditionally you want to emphasize importance of truth, credibility, avoidance of contradiction. And like you said, Russia has been actually really successful with this model.
Yeah.
And I'll go into more later detail about kind of the rebranding of the modern dictator and what's called the strongman.
Yes.
Which is a prevailing topic. But all right, so here's a couple things from the Rand article. So number one, Russian propaganda is high volume and multi-channel. So experimental research in psychology showed that to achieve success in disseminating propaganda, these are sort of some of the factors you need to have constantly happening. Multiple sources of more persuasive sources. Lots of different arguments but they all point to the same conclusion.
Yeah.
Receiving the same similar message over and over again. People also tend to assume that information from multiple sources is based off different perspectives and then has more consideration, but that's not true.
Yeah.
They also found that the number and volume of the sources also matter. So endorsement by a large number of users increases consumer trust and reliance and confidence in that information. And it was, again, they're not going to really pay attention. It's kind of like when you get, you might look at the infomercial. It's like, I gained all my hair back. And I'm like, of course you did, because you're for the infomercial.
Right.
And of course, the research, like people who think that way and are able to, what's the word?
Discern
and critical thinking.
Yes.
Thank you. Not just critical thinking, but critical understanding of information.
Yeah.
So, all right. So this number two. Russian propaganda is rapid, continuous, and repetitive. This appeals to people. It doesn't matter that it has no object relativity or it's not true.
It's not grounded in reality.
It's not objective reality. Exactly.
Right.
And this is an experimental psychology literature has shown that first impressions are very resilient. And an individual who's more likely to accept first information on a topic is going to favor that when they're faced with conflicting messages. So this is all talking about sort of how people behaviorally consume mass media.
Okay.
And, we talked about this in other episodes too, sort of using marketing tactics and using the same tactics that would make us pick Coke over Pepsi.
Yeah.
The branding of it is very specific. So kind of makes sense. This illusionary truth effect, it's very well documented. People rate statements as more truthful and valid. And if they believe them, I've said before, we have to be really careful of our belief systems because they're very much ingrained in your background and where you come from.
And beliefs aren't necessarily fact. Yeah.
Beliefs are not fact. I've always said that. Do you know that or do you believe that?
Right.
And a lot of psychology and a lot of my sessions is based off what people believe to be true. And you could still have the same emotions and neuroses that come with a belief system.
Sure.
But there's a reason why you believe that to be true. And that's what you have to kind of be a truth seeker. I think too, I was listening to an article. I am an avid listener of the Rich Roll show and his podcast because he tends to have on really interesting people.
Yeah.
And one of his, I think I talk about this later, Yuval Noah Harari, and he wrote Rage Against the Machines. He talks a lot about AI, but he talked about how finding the truth is very, very expensive. And that's going to float down to the bottom. This type of truth costs nothing.
Yeah.
Anyone can disseminate it. It's made.
You don't have to do any research.
No, you don't have to do anything. So again,
you don't have to get like credible experts.
No, it doesn't matter. Yeah. It doesn't matter. It's grandma from down the street saying, well, that's, and you and I have laughed before about conspiracy theorists, but they're actually the same argument would be like, well, that's not true.
Yeah.
That's fake. That's what they want you to believe on the other side. So that also wraps into the psychology of that phenomenon, where they talk about the third part. Russian propaganda makes no commitment to objective reality.
Yeah.
Contemporary Russian propaganda is not committed to the truth. It flies in the face of conventional wisdom, then that the truth always wins. That's not necessarily true. And there's something they call the sleeper effect. Low credibility sources manifest greater persuasive impact with the passage of time. Kind of reminds me of our urban legends.
Yeah. Yeah.
The more it appeals to your ethos or the more it appeals to fear, information that's initially assumed as valid but's later retractive or proven false can still shape your memory.
Yeah.
And you'll still have a hard time. I can relate this to lots of things we talk about.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, like my boyfriend did do that, but he's better now.
Right.
I'm going to go with what's good now. And that was a really
you should
real.
See how he treats me when no one's around.
Yeah, exactly. So that's sort of that rhetoric that even if it has the misinformation, people have poor ability to discriminate. Now, this is where I kind of get a little bit weird about it. You're still predicating this on, if you're not intelligent,
yes,
you're not going to be able to understand this information.
Right.
So I want to be really careful with that.
Yeah.
But again, there's a lot of familiar themes and messages that you would see in psychology and ways that psychology has been sort of utilized against the human population.
Yeah.
Let me think if there's anything else. Not committed to consistency. I'm going to run through these a little bit more.
Yeah.
You can counter the fire hose of falsehood, but it's expensive. But here's what they did point out that I thought was interesting. It's all in one source. So if tomorrow TikTok was gone, Fox News was gone, how would they get that messaging?
Yeah.
You'd actually have to go back to newspapers. And I think that's how this conversation started with us was, well, what does it actually take to have a credible evidence now?
Yeah.
Especially in the day of artificial intelligence, where I could see a video of someone who I trust saying and doing things that aren't true.
Discerning the truth has become harder. And I do want to go back to something that you said. We are incredibly privileged to have the benefit of higher education, to have both bachelor's degrees and master's degrees, and to have been taught how to think critically and to look for peer-reviewed documents. Yeah. Trust but verify, maybe, right? Well, I don't trust nobody because, I'm crazy. But, we have that benefit. I don't know what it feels like to be someone who so readily believes whatever kind of comes across.
I think I could speak to that as someone who grew up with, with respect to my father who's passed. I grew up in a somewhat racist household. And some of the things he said, I don't know what he would say to all this now.
Yeah.
But as a child, it was very conflicting because I knew that wasn't right.
Right.
But it's what my parent, because my mother
it's a strong man. He was the strong man of your household.
And I would say that hearing that over and over consistently, and that was the only message I would get from my father. My mother was not doing all this. She was a little complacent to it. Sorry, Mom. I would have identified myself as a Republican early on.
Sure.
And thinking a lot of the things he thought, I can see if you do grow up in a household where that is what you're hearing.
Right.
And again, I had the privilege of going, but my teacher's African American, or I have a friend who's gay. But then that created a very conflicting thing where I would argue back and then get slammed down.
Yep.
So anyways, I can speak to that I think when these are very tight-knit communities.
Yes,
where you don't speak against.
Right.
Daddy.
Well, they're very, Well, that's true. And we talked about the patriarchal kind of archetype that a lot of Americans gravitate to when they think about somebody taking care of America. It's like a sky daddy for a lot of people in the way that they see God or perceive God. Cool. And we also have the benefit of living in an area that isn't homogenous. Yeah. We are exposed to so many diverse perspectives. We're theater kids who live in San Francisco or near San Francisco. Yeah. My mom is a lesbian, but even she would say crazy racist shit, but so our perspectives have been largely molded by the diversity and the encounters that we've had with people who don't look or think like us. Well, and we have that benefit.
The ability to enjoy being counterculture.
Exactly. And respecting and appreciating people who come from cultures that are different than ours, not fearing them. Yeah. So I think that's a big thing versus somebody that comes from, a small town in like Iowa. Oh no, I'm gonna pick on you, Iowa.
Podunk, Idaho. I was like, sorry, is that an actual place?
It very well could be. I don't know. So let's go back to this. So since the AP or the AP, the authoritarian document that we looked at initially is primarily a guide for journalists, it really doesn't cover everything. So we were particularly interested in trying to answer the question, how susceptible is America to becoming a dictatorship? So we turned to a Guardian article entitled, This is how democracies die by Stephen Levitsky and Daniel Sablat. And I believe they both, or one of them, also wrote a book by the same title, if I'm not mistaken.
You're right.
I'm going to read it. So we know that extremist demagogues emerge from time to time in all societies, even in healthy democracies. The United States has had its share of them, including Henry Ford, Huey Long, Joseph McCarthy, and George Wallace. All racist. And they are all fucking racist. Henry Ford loved Hitler. He had a picture of Hitler on his desk. Not kidding. So an essential test for democracies is not whether such figures emerge, but whether political leaders and especially political parties work to prevent them from gaining power in the first place. Not what we saw here. Republicans, for the most part, lined the hell up behind this guy, even though they've all said he's insane. He's a buffoon.
Where were they back in 2016, though?
They were lining up behind him.
Oh.
They saw that he was the most auspicious choice for winning, the most auspicious prospect for winning, and they lined up behind him, even though so many of them, including his own vice president, have called him a moron. Yeah. So, isolating popular extremists requires political courage. Republicans have none for the most part. But when fear, opportunism, and miscalculation leads established parties to bring extremists into the mainstream, democracy is imperiled. Once a would-be authoritarian makes it to power, democracies face a second critical test. Will the autocratic leader subvert democratic institutions or be constrained by them? That is the test right now.
Yep.
Without robust norms, constitutional checks and balances do not serve as the bulwarks of democracy we imagine them to be. Institutions become political weapons, wielded forcefully by those who control them against those who do not. He did that in his first term.
Yep.
And I think he's poised to do it even more tenaciously.
Stop him?
Nothing.
His military is going to back him up.
Hopefully not.
Project 2025 wants it to.
I know. But we'll see. So this is the thing. This is where my husband and I disagree. He's like, these guardrails of democracy, they're going to win. And I'm like, I'm not so sure. So this is how elected autocrats subvert democracy, packing and weaponizing the courts. Sound familiar? And other neutral agencies, buying off the media and the private sector, or bullying them into silence and rewriting the rules of politics to tilt the playing field against opponents. America failed the first test in November 2016, and we just failed another test. We just failed again. Donald Trump's surprise victory was made possible not only by public disaffection, but also by the Republican Party's failure to keep an extremist demagogue within its own ranks from gaining the nomination. They lined up, and they're still lining up and suckling at the Trump teat. It's fucking disgusting. Y'all have no dignity.
No,
you don't. This is why I love Rick Wilson from the Lincoln Project. Ooh, that man. I love him. He's done some dirty things. He's aligned with some really bad presidents in the past, but now he is on fire. He is my man. He is what a Republican should be. Anyway, I digress. Check out the Lincoln Project, you guys. They're going to be on fire now. So by the way, this was written, what I just read, in 2018, obviously before January 6th. Yeah. The authors go back to well before Trump became president to talk about how our democratic guardrails, things like the courts, press, elections, Congress, were already weakening. Yeah. They said, today, however, the guardrails of American democracy are weakening. The erosion of our democratic norms began in the 1980s, the 1990s, and accelerated in the 2000s under George W. Bush. Remember?
Yeah.
The war on terror.
Yeah.
The Patriot Act. The Patriot Act dismantled so many of our rights and so much of our privacy. Yep. And the majority of folks in Congress said, let's do it. Yep. And the majority of the American people said, we want to be safe. Let's forfeit our rights.
Because it was done in the name of fear.
Yes.
Appealing to others as bad. And that could be discerned based off of race.
Yes, and it was also used to start not one, but two wars.
Yes.
Which were very profitable for certain institutions. Yep. Very profitable.
And you look at how that coincides with the rise of the internet.
Yes.
And social media.
Yep.
And
So yeah, no, it's only gotten worse. And Trump may have accelerated this process, but he didn't cause it. That's important to remember. The challenges facing American democracy run deeper. And this is why I'm concerned, because we've already been chipping away at this. He might be the straw that breaks the Democratic camel's back. That's my concern. So the challenges facing America, again, run deeper. The weakening of our democratic norms is rooted in extreme partisan polarization, one that extends beyond policy differences into an existential conflict over race and culture.
Yep.
Therefore,
that's all this is about.
Yeah. And
Not
therefore,
words,
like they say, there are reasons for alarm. Not only did America elect a demagogue in 2016, but we did so at a time when the norms that once protected our democracy were already coming unmoored. Wonder what they'd say now. Yeah. Right? Citizens are freaked out too. You know, I gave you the statistics earlier on how folks feel about our democracy. A lot of folks think it's in peril. And in a poll taken earlier this year, almost 3/4 of U.S. respondents agreed that the country's democracy used to be a good example for other countries to follow, but has not been in recent years.
You're a joke.
Right. We are. More than 60% of U.S. respondents in another poll from December 2013 believe that democracy in America is at risk, depending on who wins the upcoming presidential election. Republican respondents see Democratic candidates as threatening the system and vice versa. So we both see each other as threats. In the United States, 4 factors could trigger Democratic backsliding. Political scientist Susan Mettler of Cornell University and Robert Lieberman of Johns Hopkins University wrote in March in the Annals of American Academy of Political and Social Science. Those factors are polarization, conflicts over belonging, economic inequality, and executive aggrandizement.
What's that?
So it's him saying, I'm the president. I rule. I am the end all be all.
That word. Yeah. Well, and I think the polarization is what you really feel.
Yeah.
And that feeling of walking, I think, was it our text chain where we were like, you kind of felt this feeling of looking at people, being like, which one are you?
Yeah.
Are you a good one or
I mean, I'm walking around feeling that way. Like who voted against the rights of half of the people in this country and who can I trust?
Well, we're going back to wearing the safety pin.
Yeah.
Again. That's how you're going to know. Well, but then you don't know because then people are going to fake safety.
Who knows? Who knows? But, you know, I'll move ahead here. But ultimately, most political scientists don't necessarily think that we are going to devolve into a complete authoritarian dictatorship. Essentially, what they think is going to happen is that Trump, where is it here? Oh, I think it's a little later, but here it is. So will the U.S. actually fall to a dictatorship? So what they say, these experts, they say full-blown authoritarianism is unlikely. That's good. But the signs are clear that the U.S. will at the very least become a hybrid regime under Trump or a semi-autocratic regime similar to Viktor Orban's Hungary.
Yeah.
So
that's what I've been seeing as the most. Well, and you can't predict no one could have predicted January 6th.
Nobody could have, but we should have seen it coming. And who knows, I know there'll be a peaceful transfer of power under Joe Biden. What's going to happen in 4 years? Because I have a feeling he's going to fuck this country up so bad that either he's going to refuse to leave, as he said recently he should never have done in 2020, or people are going to be so eager to get rid of him and the system is going to work as it was intended to work and his ass is going to be out. But what happens when it's time for his ass to leave? Yeah. That's what I'm afraid of, because we've already seen it once. So, plans are in the works. So the state will be hollowed out. This is what these experts think. Hollowed out and an increasingly more ineffective, unable or unwilling to deliver key services like disaster aid. Great. That's great, especially with climate change. Less disaster aid. I think that's a grand idea. Plans are in the works to fire 50,000 career civil servants. Hundreds of important regulations that ensure that there is clean air and water, which protects citizens from corporate greed, are likely to be rolled back. We saw that in his first administration. One of his first things was to pull out of the Paris Climate Accords. That was one. The list goes on and on.
It's a pretty big one, too.
It's a huge one. So Trump has made clear he's going to weaponize the justice system against his political opponents. He's already warned about what he'll do to politicians like Democratic former House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Don't you come for Auntie Nancy. I will get you. In total, Trump. Oh, great. Now the FBI is going to fucking come for me. I already have a dossier starting from when I was like 18. So in total, Trump has made over 100 threats to investigate and imprison his political opponents. The descriptions of what Trump's America is going to look like go on, but you get the picture. Ultimately, the author concludes that in 2024, the Supreme Court, as we said, ruled that Trump is essentially immune from prosecution, so he can seemingly abuse power if he sees fit, just like a fucking dictator.
Well, he's done that whether he has the immunity or not.
Exactly. But now he literally has carte blanche by one of the guardrails that is supposed to keep the executive from gaining too much power.
Yeah.
That's off. So this resonated with me. This article ended with, well, the U.S. will I can't even talk. I'm so fired up. Well, the U.S. will not likely become a full-blown authoritarian regime. It is certainly no longer a fully functioning democracy, and America voted for it. That just gets me. It's like a snail having salt fantasies, y'all. Don't you prioritize and care about our civil liberties, our human rights, the future of this planet? Yeah. Do you all just think climate change is a fucking Chinese hoax like Trump purported it was?
I think people do.
Can you explain to me, Carolyn, why so many people seem to love a dictator? It's almost like people want to be ruled by a strong daddy, just like nasty ass Tucker Carlson said. What is this? It is so antithetical to anything I want from my government. I don't get it.
I know.
Help me.
First of all, when you cry, your tears contain a concentration of something called leucine and kefalin. And that's a hormone that acts as a natural painkiller mood regulator.
Oh, cool.
So you cry, girl.
I'm going to mess up my makeup, dog.
You cry. You get high off your own hormones. All right. Here's what I got.
Okay.
All right. Like I said, it's sad reading a lot of the articles that I found because they were mostly written 2 years prior to this and basically map out what we watched unfold. And even in them, we're saying, but that wouldn't really happen.
Yeah. You're talking about January 6th.
Yeah. So, all right. So let me get real psychoanalytical for a second.
Do it.
All right. So let me talk about one of my favorite psychoanalysts, Carl Jung. I want to talk about the father archetype because this is important. So if you've ever read Carl Jung's Man and His Symbols, which is not a very feminist title, whatever. Carl Jung describes archetypes as universal, archaic symbols and images that derive from a collective unconscious, fundamental building blocks of human experience. Psychoanalysts view the father archetype as strong and ingrained into a symbol of our psyche. Even someone who doesn't have a father,
like me,
but you have a conscious and an unconscious view of what a father type would be.
Sure, society has taught me to think a particular way about what a father should look like, sound like, etc.
Yeah, or not be. Yes, which could also become your schema. Yeah. So here are the characteristics. You're gonna love this. Authority, which authority is good. Authoritative parenting is okay. Authoritarian parenting, and if you just look on family systems alone, the authoritative versus authoritarian versus compassionate versus laissez-faire parenting, there's so much research on that. Oh, yeah. We know authoritarian parenting makes very brittle children and traumatized children. Anyway, I digress. Characteristics: authority, protection, order, guidance. They represent law, social norms, structure, rational aspects of life. In many cultures, the father figure is seen as a provider, protector, disciplinarian. I think in your family, that would have been the mother figure as well. This archetype is not limited. So I want to say, too, it's not necessarily gender-based always.
Okay, that makes sense.
You could have both feminine and masculine of that archetype. So it's not limited to biological fathers, but it also manifests heavily in leaders, teachers, and even deities. So here's the duality that Jung talks about. He emphasizes this archetype has a dual nature, embodying both the positive and the negative. Or as I would understand it, the masculine and feminine. There's a positive side of any archetype. In the father, it includes qualities such as wisdom, protection, benevolence, growth, discipline, moral integrity. I feel that in a Kamala Harris, in a Tim Walz.
Yes.
That's the archetype of a father that feels warm and yummy to you and I, right?
Well, I only had a dad like Tim.
Right?
Or a mom like Kamala.
I'll take either, right? Yeah, well, you have my mom. She's
and
like
I have my other mom who's wonderful. It's just my biological mom who really falls into that authoritarian and laissez-faire at the same time.
Weird.
Yeah.
Depending on what mood she was in.
Exactly.
Listen to our borderline episode. Yeah. Anyway, so here's the negative aspects of authoritarian: oppressive, rigid. It has a shadow side that manifests as tyrannical, controlling, and suppressive of individuality. You look at Trump supporters, what do you see?
White people,
but they're in
not exclusively.
America. But red, white, and blue.
Yeah.
There's a look. There's a, you know them when you see them.
A lot of God, guns, and Trump shirts out there.
Yeah. It's all the same shit, though. It's like you can kind of almost mock it. So in modern society and contemporary times, the father archetype continues to shape our understanding of authority and leadership and lots of different roles, right? So here's what I kind of fold this into now. So some people find safety in dictatorship. And this is what you and I are going to have to get really good at, is turning that anger into what has gone wrong.
Okay.
In order to create that.
To make somebody drawn to somebody who behaves like this.
This might give you some thoughts on this. So there's a Carnegie article. Of course, I can't find where I got it from, but it's linked in the show notes. They talk about how in early 21st century, we saw the rise of modernization.
It's been a long week, bitches.
Decreasing the hold on tyrannical regimes in many countries. So dictators maintain powers by repressing opinions. We kind of know, hopefully some of you know what a dictator is. Think Stalin, Mussolini, Hitler, like more 21st century, though, would be like a Putin. What's the hungry guy?
Victor Orban.
Yeah, thank you. So the key principle is always the same. Intimidation.
Yep.
Fear. I had a very authoritarian father at times.
Yeah.
I was frightened to death of him.
Yeah.
He was scary when he was mad. And I would do anything he said. So the central goal is always the same: monopolize political power. We call this, today's political men are strong men because they realize in current conditions, violence, although I kind of feel this was written before the insurrection, isn't always as helpful. Instead of terrorizing citizens, they became more skillful. They actually reshaped their beliefs about the world. They didn't show up in their military uniform. They showed up in business suits.
Right.
They became Fortune 500 guys because God, golden glory, right?
Yep.
So it looks different. It sounds different. They're actually able to manipulate information, what they call spin doctors in democracy.
Yeah.
And they actually engineered this kind of spin dictator is the word that this Carnegie article found.
But Trump isn't even skilled at that. He wears his stupidity on his sleeve. He can't turn a phrase.
I'll get there. So that's your question. Okay, well but why? Right? You're saying, but why?
Because he has dementia. And a bunch of other psychological problems.
He's a sociopath.
Yes, that too.
Madman, and he's a violent
narcissist
person. Yeah. Beyond that, he's a violent predator.
Yeah.
So the appeal of authoritarian regime. Damn it.
My authoritarian vagine. That's the only place it's appropriate.
Yeah,
no, it's
absolutely.
My vagine's authoritative, not authoritarian.
mine's more laissez-faire. No, it's committed now. All right. So authoritarian
lazy roast
regime.
beef sandwich.
Did you call it a lazy roast beef sandwich?
I did. We needed some levity, folks.
Thank you. I did.
Okay,
Thank
please
you.
go back to science.
All right. Appeal of authoritarian regimes. And leaders can be influenced by psychological and historical factors. We have looked at this with the wrong side of logic in our brains and our social norms. This is an article I found in Psychology Today that asks that we go back. Sorry, I wrote this really wrong. The article from Psychology Today is called "Why Do People Choose Authoritarianism Over Democracy?"
It's what happens when you do your research high.
Thank you. I was just tired.
Yeah, that happens.
So it's in Psychology Today. It's in the show notes. But they're basically saying, what if we went past this is a character defect and a pathology and actually looked at the individual supporter themselves? And this is why I like it. So, quote from the article: political scientists and psychologists have traditionally sought to explain the appeal of this regime. I can't say it right. Authoritarianism, portraying them as what we've talked about: cults of personality,
absolutely,
the charismatic leader, the Dunning-Kruger effect. These are all things you and I have talked about ad nauseum, of having an authoritarian personality. It's a form of psychopathy or a character defect. And, the masses are drawn to this, and that, again, they're saying this is a kind of loneliness due to disconnectedness with society and the world. But if you draw on psychoanalytic theory, someone named Theodor Adorno, who I had no idea who that was. We clearly didn't learn that in my school because we were not psychodynamic. We were trying to make planters for the unhoused. So anyway, it's
a beautiful thing and all, but
yeah, thank you.
Sounds very USF.
Yeah,
sorry.
He characterized the authoritarian personality as as a willingness or need to submit to authority figures due to a weak ego, along with the embrace of an outgroup prejudice and aggression due to repressed and displaced hostility towards, this is very dynamic, towards one's own parents, resulting from punitive child rearing with inconsistent affection.
This is Trump himself.
Yes. So now enter this framework. This is why I put this in there. So it's going somewhere. Follow me down my...
Wrap it up, girl.
My hole.
Bring us full circle. So, I don't want to talk about your hole anymore.
Sorry,
your laissez-faire hole.
It's the framework.
Okay, lay the foundation.
Enter in this framework of a broader social attitude, or what's a disposition of loneliness. So this is something I did read about too. The disaffected youth that we have, and the disaffected younger population. This was a New York Times daily post where they talked about this. You usually hear about this in school, that disaffected youth are disengaged, have a higher level of cautiousness and concern, low level antisocial behavior. You would usually see this, and they credit that to low skills, low job, and no future. Who does that sound like to you?
A lot of Trump supporters?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. So 1980, a psychologist, Bob Altemeyer, modeled right-wing authoritarianism according to a social learning theory, that an attitude that's simply adopted from others. Karen Stenner, I love the stuff that they found from her, characterized the appeal of authoritarianism as determined by one's interest in authority and conformity versus individual freedom and difference. So it doesn't matter whether the threat's perceived or real.
Yeah.
In the form of a challenge to the normative order or an assault on your value, Stenner found, quote, the more ideological distance authoritarians perceive between themselves and the other, the more prejudiced, intolerant, and punitive they become. And as bizarre as it is for those of us who believe in liberal democracy, within this framework, a Trump supporter desires conformity and will be submissive. So the daddy thing is true.
Yeah.
You will be the masochist. I will be the son.
Right.
Except it's not consensual. Submissive willingness to give up personal freedom that makes them characterologically wrong. The author of this article says that, quote, when the appeal of authoritarianism is instead understood not as a kind of submission to authority, but about being controlled and wanting to end up on the side that's doing the controlling rather than be on the other side.
Sure.
That is what so often rises from the ashes of a failed democracy.
Okay.
And this is why, again, I somewhat blame, and I've been mocked for this in some posts, the trad wife and other conservative views of the gender role and family values. I interpret the article as saying the same thing.
Yeah.
Make America Great Again. Fascists have already made, quote, the conclusion that their country has descended into moral depravity.
Yeah.
And that immigrants and others, enemies from within, are trying to destroy the, quote, American way. Replacing democracy with authoritarianism seems like the necessary evil.
It's a trade-off.
It's a worthwhile trade-off that the ends justify the means.
Right.
You just finished my quote.
That's right.
So I don't know if that makes more sense to you.
It makes a lot of sense. And, unfortunately, again, I go back to racism, right? And all the white men and the white women who voted for Trump, they want to preserve white supremacy. And for all the Latino dudes, and there were a lot of them, statistics have showed this, I feel like that's an internalization of oppression.
Yeah, I
have seen immigrants, other immigrants.
Yes.
My ex-husband came from Guatemala. He and his family came over undocumented, escaping the civil war that the United States helped cause. And they have been here for many years. They actually got amnesty through Reagan, of all people, because Reagan saw them as people they could make money off of. And so now my ex-husband, his grandma says, mijo, immigrants aren't like we are. Immigrants today are different than us. He's like, what does that mean? Because he doesn't believe in any of this shit. Yeah. They're othering their own folks because they've internalized the oppression, and that women do that. All sorts of groups, marginalized groups, internalize white supremacy oppression. And by virtue of being in close proximity and a follower of white leaders, white power, white systems. Yeah. I think there's this notion of we'll be accepted, we'll be spared.
Yeah. No,
bullshit.
Nope.
You're on the chopping block just like I am. Yep. Don't get it twisted. Yep. Anyway, we're not going to talk about critical race theory anymore. So we want to actually leave you with some hope. These are some things according to the ACLU, who put this article together actually in March. In the event that Trump would win the White House again, they put together some stuff that made me feel a little more hopeful. The ACLU is an incredible organization. We may disagree with them when it comes to conservatorship and ways to help our unhoused folks, but that's pretty much all I disagree with them on. Oh, and letting NAMBLA members use public libraries around children.
Gross.
Problematic. Okay, aside from that, the ACLU is awesome. I am a card-carrying member and I interned with them in college. Anyway, so they said, we must believe Trump when he reveals his authoritarian plans for a second term and take these threats seriously. He's made clear he intends to deploy the military to crush protests, activate state National Guards to deport millions of immigrants, build on his legacy of gutting reproductive freedoms by implementing a nationwide abortion ban, create a police state in which anyone who he views as an enemy is surveilled, and our law enforcement are further empowered to use lethal force and undermine the integrity of our elections. They say terrifying as these threats are, despair and resignation are not a strategy. The ACLU actually, during the last Trump administration, filed 434 legal actions against his administration, and hundreds of other lawsuits were filed by sister organizations, state attorneys, and even private citizens. Litigation remains a powerful tool, even in the face of Trump's 245 judicial appointments. Much to his chagrin, much of his appointees proved willing to buck his agenda as Trump-appointed judges stood up nearly en masse for the rule of law and civil liberties in response to an attempt to overturn the 2020 election. Thank God. Yeah. And this is where I get a little hopeful about the guardrails, right? And this is where even in the past, when presidents have nominated Supreme Court justices, they expected them to be 100% political animals. They haven't always been that way. Even Roberts has bucked the Republican agenda from time to time. He also was responsible for determining that citizens or corporations were citizens, I believe, but that's another story. Anyway, should Trump return to the White House, which we know is happening, advocacy organizations will need to come together like never before. No single organization will be able to stop the power of the federal government at Trump's disposal. We will activate our 6.5 million supporters and our 54 affiliates in every state and territory in partnership with grassroots organizations, labor unions, religious congregations, community leaders. We're going to exercise our First Amendment right to mobilize the people in the streets, lobby in their state houses, and advocate for local leaders to resist general strikes, economic boycotts, worker walkouts. This is student workouts. Kids have a lot of power.
Disobedience on the level of governance.
Yep. And they say in a second Trump administration, the public must force Congress to serve as a co-equal branch of government, not the lapdog of the executive branch. Yeah. We have to hold Congress accountable to do its job, especially since it's a Republican majority in the Senate, keeping the pressure on through calls, lobbying, grassroots visits, Supreme Court's Dobbs decision overturning Roe v. Wade, all thanks to a new Trump majority on the bench, illustrated the extent to which states are our last line of defense to bring forth the will of the people on issues like abortion and wherever reproductive. Oh, I get so upset. Wherever reproductive freedom has been on the ballot since we've won. Yeah, we've won. I have not looked at what happened this last election because I have not had the heart to look, but my hope is that we're preserving that right at the state level. So also don't forget about local government. Yay! We can institute real change and protect our most vulnerable. There are around 600 sanctuary jurisdictions in the United States, which include cities, states, counties. San Francisco is one. The District of Columbia is a sanctuary jurisdiction. Those of us in sanctuary cities are well poised to protect our immigrant brothers and sisters. And don't forget about our unions. Okay. Trump will absolutely name an anti-union motherfucker to head the National Labor Relations Board. So we must fight back with our local union chapters, and we will. SCIU over here. Social media is also a powerful tool. We're definitely finding that to be the case. We have found so many like-minded people on TikTok.
Oh my God.
They are part of our community. You all are part of our community now.
Thank you.
Twat JC on TikTok, everybody. So, expand your community. You'll feel less alone, especially if you live in a red state. If social media is all you have to feel more connected to like-minded people who care about the protection of human rights and civil liberties and the planet, you do that. Whatever you need to find your community. Carolyn, any touchy-feely therapist advice to close us out?
Well, I have a couple, and I certainly can, again, self-compassion phrases, Tara Brach's rain. But I want to talk about something that I think is more true to the philosophy. And this comes from Ryan Holiday. Stoicism, something that I found very helpful. And that's the first thing I did was go, okay, the obstacle's the way, the obstacle's the way. Wow. So this is from him.
Okay.
These are the key points. Someone had to win. Someone had to lose.
Mm-hmm.
It's inevitable that it wasn't going to go someone's way.
Yeah.
What we're all grappling with is that we don't know what the future is going to be.
Yeah.
It could be really, really bad.
Yeah.
As you're talking about. And he talks about how it's actually wrong. It's not wrong to have these feelings, and it's not wrong to sit with that. Stoicism, though, is about, okay, but it's not about the feelings. Now what?
Okay.
And he's saying, it's not wrong to think about these things, but really, has anything really changed individually?
Mm-hmm.
Elections don't necessarily change everything if you think about it.
Yeah.
Because what is asked or obligated of me as a human, it shouldn't matter whether Harris won or Trump won.
Sure.
And whoever is in power, you are still expected to be a good person and a person of virtue. Marcus Aurelius, bound to the good. Like an emerald is just an emerald. Doesn't matter where you put it. It's still going to be what it is. Be who you are. Show your true colors. You have a job. It's our job and our duty to right now act with courage.
Yeah.
Who's in charge shouldn't stop that.
Oh, no. I think we have to act with courage even more so with him being in charge.
That's what Ryan says. He says you have to act with courage, discipline, justice, and wisdom. In fact, this election presents us with an urgent opportunity to act on our virtues. So this is where I think this is interesting. People behind their keyboards who are saying what you and I are saying are actually going to have to do something this time.
Yep.
People have been resting on their virtues for far too long.
Yeah.
And I'm sick of it.
Yep.
When that person who I know sent me a message wanting to talk, my answer is going to be absolutely not. Yeah. I have nothing to say for you.
Trump supporter who reached out to
Trump
Carolyn.
Supporter.
Yeah.
I'm terribly, I appreciate you, but no.
Well, what's going around right now, that message that says, your side is sharing messages of congratulation and thanking God, and our folks are sharing crisis lines, and this is what gets me, right? Like we have to stand up and do something.
Yes.
Find a way to do that, guys. You can do that at your local church. You can do that in your communities. I fortunately am in a job where every day my job has already been, and now that calling is even greater, to create programs and systems and opportunities for our most vulnerable people in San Francisco. My work is going to be made harder by Trump, but we are not going to stop.
Well, and that's the thing, that there's that population who's actively doing things and puts their money where their mouth is.
That's right.
But nothing should change or exempt any one of us from doing that. There's going to be consequences, though.
Yeah.
There's going to be consequences. There's going to be costs. There's going to be high stakes.
Yeah.
I have clients and friends who are now choosing not to go to certain universities because of the state that they are in. People are going to have to actually make choices. And this election changes that.
Yeah.
Your obligation and your duty, you're actually going to have to get off your ass.
Yeah.
And I actually think that that's part of how I can speak for myself. That's part of how I got here.
Yep.
Because I don't think I have done enough.
And if
as much as I think I have, that's a failure.
You can always do more. And if you are a member of a vulnerable population, like an undocumented immigrant, let us be your voice.
Yeah.
Let us stand with you. If you are too afraid to step out, we understand.
Yeah.
And that's where being an ally comes into play. You have to protect the most
no matter what
vulnerable.
The cost, even if it's your life.
That's right. That's right.
You have to do, and that's nothing new.
Yep.
You have to, they're going to do what they have to do.
Yep.
I'm going to do what I have to do. And I'll say this also, you cannot do that if you are not self-governing yourself.
Yeah.
If you are not taking good care of your body, if you are not doing what you need to do to stay well.
Yeah.
So please don't feel bad if you are still like me, feeling really shut down.
Or drinking
really
every night
sad,
like me.
Or feeling really, that's no different than, and I'm glad there are people who can stand up. I've had to take a break from it. It's too much for me.
Yep.
But we have to, and I also want to say too, half the people are with us.
Yes.
You're not alone.
The ACLU has 6.5 million card-carrying members, people who believe in the rule of law and protecting people's civil liberties. That means something.
Then do something with that card.
Yep.
To me, this is another call to action.
It absolutely is.
And it's a real one.
Yep.
I'm talking like Nazi Germany, Underground Railroad shit.
This is the biggest threat our democracy has ever faced. This man, like Maya Angelou said, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time. And he showed us. And the worst part about this is he showed us who he is. And people said, I believe you and I want you to be our president again. What the fuck?
I know.
I ain't trying to be friends with those motherfuckers.
No,
Not right now. No. It might come, but right now it's time for me to fight with and for the people who are going to be most impacted. And that's our final thought for you. You guys get out there and fight. You are a part of our community and we are a part of yours and we're here to support each other. And right now I need to go have a drink, but we appreciate you listening.
I'm going to hug her, everyone.
Oh God. You can listen to us on Apple, Spotify, YouTube. Please follow us on TikTok. We're Twat JC. Yeah, we're having a good time. All right, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care of yourselves.
Please take care of yourselves.
Like Jerry Springer said, take care of yourselves and each other. There might have been a lot of fucked up shit with that show, but that final sentiment
I did like
is valid. The final thought. Yes. All right, everybody. We'll catch you next week.
Bye.
Bye.